Okay, we're continuing explaining the Shemoneh Esrei. We're holding at the second bracha right now. So the second bracha starts with the phrase Ata Gibor Leolam Hashem. Really, the word here is Adonai, which means the Lord, our God. The term Aleph, spelled Aleph Daled Nun Yud, is referring to God's sovereignty, God's kingship specifically. It's although we pronounce the name Yud Kei Vav Kei also as with the Adnut, Aleph Daled Nun Yud. When it's written this way, it's specifically dealing with the attribute of God's Malchut more so. The other, when it's Yud Kei Vav Kei, it's commonly explained as the attribute of mercy. Although we don't pronounce it as it's written, so it sounds the same, but when one reads, he sees a difference between Aleph Daled Nun Yud and Yud Kei Vav Kei. There'll be a difference. So here, Ata Gibor Leolam Hashem, this time we're writing Aleph Daled Nun Yud, which is dealing with God's sovereignty, God's Malchut, and it's rightfully so. We're speaking about God's might. God is mighty for eternally, and that He is Mechaya Metim. He revives the dead. Now, this concept of being Mechaya Metim is, of course, a Jewish belief that, every righteous person that lives, all those that merit to be, that, and the pasuk says actually that Kol Yisrael is Kulam Tzadikim, that we're all righteous. Mishnah Perkei Avot talks about how every neshama from Israel has a chelik in the world to come, and so it's a basic principle of our faith that we are going to be resurrected when the time of Mashiach comes. Anyone that has already passed away. So here this bracha addresses this koach of Hashem. Now the truth is, this is a challenging idea for some, because when you think about the permanency of death, right? We think about person dies, it's not taking a nap, it's forever. And the concept of a person's body, it's buried, it deteriorates, it's completely there's no more body there, yet we're told that one day God will wake up all those that worthy of being resurrected that ever lived. And it's some people that look at the world, from a natural perspective, their emunah is limited, so they might have trouble accepting such a far out idea. But the truth is,
where are they going to put everybody?
Where are they going to put? How's God going to manage to get everybody back? How's He going to rebuild them when their bodies are deteriorated? And the concept of coming back to life is so far removed from a person that it's hard. It's a big leap. It's a big step for some. But the truth is, anyone that believes in a divine being, anyone that believes in Hashem. So think about it this way: to have created the world from utter nothingness, and to have created a person that never existed, that is actually logically more difficult to do than to recreate something that already existed. To recreate a human being that already existed should be easier than to create that person from nothing. Just like the world. Making a world from nothing is harder than, manipulating a world that already exists. So if one really thinks about it, the fact that God made us and made this world should be proof enough that God could resurrect those that passed away. First of all, the essence of a person is his soul. And that soul, of course, we believe doesn't really ever die. The soul he spends time in this world by virtue of being invested in a body. The body is almost like a suit, call it a suit. It houses the soul. Just like you see when a person dies, the body is inanimate, it has no life in it. When the person's alive, so you see the body moves around. The body itself is just a physical, like a house. And so the body itself can be, whether we talk about how it's going to be rebuilt, whether, that's those details we're not getting into. But the essence of a person anyhow never really dies. The soul doesn't die. The soul comes and goes. And the soul, when a person passes away anyway, it goes to the upper worlds, call it Gan Eden, which is really a world of souls, Olam HaNeshamot. And it's a temporary place for souls that are worthy to spend the time until we reach the end of days, when we're done doing all of the work necessary to merit the world to come. So as far as the soul and the essence of a person, it's not really that he has to be recreated or resurrected. It's really the resurrection of the dead really is focusing on the resurrection of the bodies, because the novelty of of the world to come, of the Yemot HaMashiach and Tchias HaMesim, the revival of the dead, is that the souls will return back to their bodies. The very body that it lived in and did all of its good deeds, they will be reunited, back together again.
Are you accepting questions, or are we?
You have a question? Go ahead.
Okay. One is, this is not really a choice that we're given. This is one of the, I think it's the 12th or the 13th principle.
Right, it is a principle.
Okay. So, by Rambam's perspective, this is necessary. This is not something that is a free choice. This is something that
a person does have the choice of believing it or not. According to the Rambam that you're mentioning, if a person doesn't believe, and so too the Mishnah continues to say that speaks about the world to come and who has a part in the world to come and who doesn't, a person who doesn't believe in these concepts and rejects them, according to the Rambam, does then, and the Mishnah, you can lose your portion in the world to come. There are different things a person can do negatively where, according to the simple level of the Mishnah, that a person can lose his portion in the world to come. But we're taught by the mystics that even such people still have a chance to regain their status of having a place in the world to come. They have to do tshuva. They have certain maybe tikkunim that their soul has to go through over reincarnations, and they have to fix and mend their ways and their mistakes. But it's very hard for a Jewish soul to become utterly lost, because every Jewish soul is part of a general whole, and if there'll be one missing, so there'll be a blemish. And so God is constantly trying to figure out or present ways for souls to redeem themselves, even after they've lost their chance in the world to come. You had a question?
So, like, you're saying if some guy is like an atheist and he's Jewish, like he's halachically Jewish, but he's like an atheist all his life, but he doesn't really commit any like terrible affairs other than not doing mitzvot and not believe. I guess those are in this context. Those are themselves very negative things, which can put a person outside, so to speak, of the realm of Judaism and meriting a place in the world to come. Again, these are according to the laws of the Rambam. Certain things disqualify a person from the world to come if he does them willfully, of course. If you're talking about a child that doesn't know he's Jewish or that was raised secular and never had a chance to embrace Judaism for what it is, but of course if you would ask him, do you believe in the divine being that created the world, he might say yes. He just doesn't believe that it's the version that we want to tell him. He doesn't necessarily understand who the sages were to believe in them or not. So he's almost what you call a victim of circumstances. The halachic term is a kidnapped child, really. His mind, although he knows he's Jewish in that sense, but he's been, so to speak, the ability to embrace Judaism for what it is has been robbed from him, because it's just as if you take a child and kidnap him from his Jewish family and raise him as a Christian, he will never know he was Jewish. So this person, although even he knows he's Jewish superficially, but the real opportunity to choose Judaism and its truth as a religion has been, so to speak, taken from him. So he's not as willfully responsible. He's a victim of circumstances. So in these cases, that could be that in judgment he's not as guilty, so that we could that God will work out how in future lifetimes he could make fix this mistake somehow, and not necessarily lose his share entirely in the world to come. We have a Gemara actually that speaks about one of the great sages, the teacher of Rabbi Meir, which was one of the very, very big sage who ended up going off the derech. They call him Acher. The Gemara refers to him as Acher, the other one. And so when he passed away, so the Gemara records the story of him passing away, and it says that since he became unfortunately an apikoros. He rejected the true belief that we're supposed to uphold. So for that reason, he should have gone to Gehenna, like anyone that sins. But he learned Torah on such a level. He was such a big sage that for that reason that he wasn't going to be judged in Gehenna. So he was kind of in limbo. To Gehenna he couldn't go because he learned Torah, but to Gan Eden he also couldn't go because of his he went against the Torah in deciding to become an apikoros, and so he was stuck in between. So Rabbi Meir says, when I'm going to pass away, I am going to, so to speak, make sure that he goes to Gehenna in order that he should be able to go to Gan Eden afterwards.
Where does the 12-month limitation come into play?
Where exactly, I can't say offhand. We're just told that a wicked person goes 12 months, and one that's not a Russia doesn't go for a full 12 months. Therefore, we only say Kaddish for a person less than 12 months. But I can't answer you where exactly the source for that is right now.
So we only say Kaddish for a year.
Less than a year. The different customs, 11 months or 11 months and 3 weeks. But the point is less than a year, to not to show that the person that you're saying Kaddish for, was usually a parent, was a Rasha, not to openly show that. Anyhow, Acher, the story about Acher, so Rabbi Meir was determined not to leave him in limbo like that. And he said, when I pass away, I will make sure that a smoke comes out from his grave, which would symbolize that he was entered into Gehenna to be judged. After that, Rabbi Meir did pass away, and that did happen. Rabbi Yochanan comes and says, is it such a great thing to have your Rebbe, your master, be burned? That's really essentially what's happening. When I pass away, I'm going to make sure the smoke stops coming up from his grave, which means that I'm going to make sure he goes into Gan Eden. And he said, if I'm holding him by the hand, who's going to stop me, basically? It says, the story records, when he passed away, he managed to get Acher back into Gan Eden. So we see from this story that even if a person is guilty of becoming an apikores, so you see there's not necessarily the end of the story for a person. In the case of Acher, he had great merit for learning Torah so much on such a high level that the great tzaddikim worked hard to get him, to help him do what was necessary, going to Gehenna first and then finally going to Gan Eden. The story concludes with an interesting piece with Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. So his daughter or granddaughter, I have to check, comes to Rabbi and says, "I need help. She was poor. She needed tzedakah. She needed parnasa." So he said, "Who are you?" He said, "I'm this daughter or granddaughter, depending on, I have to check, of Acher." So Rabbi was surprised because a verse states clearly that the wicked won't have any remembrance of them, meaning they won't have a continued offspring. So he was surprised that this person that went against the Torah still had offspring in the world. There's still people descending from him in the world. So she said, don't look at his deeds, look at his Torah. And it says that a fire came from heaven and burnt the bench that Rabbi was sitting on. Rabbi realized that the Torah and Hashem was makpid on the cover of this person, of Acher, even though he went against the Torah, and he cried. And he says, if this is what Hashem does for those that went against the Torah, or this, how much more so for those that are for the Torah, that live their whole life properly and are devoted to Torah, how much more so is the Torah going to be there to protect their honor in the event? So we see clearly from the story that even in a case where something negative happened, there is still the potential for fixing. I believe the Ben Ish Chai, one of the great Kabbalists of the later generations, he lived in the 1800s. He explains clearly that when it says that the soul loses its portion in the world to come, that it doesn't mean absolutely, according to everything we've been saying, that it just means it's going to be more difficult for that person to find his final rectification. But it's still there. It's still possible. That's what he, in his name, I heard it explained. Rav Yaakov Hillel said that idea in the name of the Ben Ish Chai. Anyhow, so with that we spoke a little bit about the concept of Tchias HaMesim. We'll continue with this topic more tomorrow, continuing the perush of the second blessing of Shemoneh Esrei. You're welcome.